confined prisoner of Dr. Mishra. Dr. Mishra was supporting him. He was allowing him to bathe and cook at his apartment 7 blocks away. But Prabhupada needed svatantra. He needed independence. So at his own cost, $70 a month, he rented a very narrow room. It looked like a train, a train, very narrow and long, with the glass door, and that was the glass door up above that was broken into. But he had his independence, at least. He could give his own classes. He could speak the philosophy of Vaishnavism and Krishna consciousness. And he was getting a following, all coming from Dr. Mishra's students. And the students were telling their friends, and they were coming as well. But the situation in India was worse than in America. Prabhupada was doing well. And in India, Tirtha Maharaj, he wrote back there was no way he could help because the situation was so poor in India at the time. Thank you. The Indian economic condition in 1966. India faced significant economic challenges. The reasons behind this included 3 mostly. There were wars going on at that time, 1966. There was a war with China going on. China's always trying to take Arunachal Pradesh, even to this day. Any way they can, they move in their borders. And from the other side, Pakistan. Now Pakistan, unfortunately, Pakistan was getting military support from America. America was building up Pakistan. We went there at that time in the very early 1970s. We went to get a visa, and the exact same people, they speak the same language. They speak Urdu there, just like we speak Hindi here. But big cars and big roads, and America was just throwing money into the country. And India wasn't getting American support at that time. India was pro-Soviet, communist, because the new government under Nehru, they were socialist-minded. They wanted the government to control everything, which is more attuned to communism. The government controls all the industry, all the production, and the people just work and they get a little bit of money in return. But the American philosophy of democracy was that you make your own private businesses, you work very hard, you build it up very nicely, you become wealthy on your own strength. And India wasn't following that path, they were following the Soviet path. So there was a big divide. And India was suffering terribly as a result of it, with China on one side, Pakistan on the other side, and no support from America. And when finally Indira Gandhi became the prime minister, she was the 3rd prime minister, she realized this is not working. There was drought for 2 years in a row. And America, because the Soviet Union by that time was already breaking up, there was rift with the whole communist philosophy is that there's constant revolution. So there was revolution within the country. The countries that the Soviet had taken over, they all wanted their independence back. So Indira Gandhi got smart, and she realized that America being at that time the wealthiest country in the world, America also controlling practically the UN and the International Money Fund that loaned money to poor countries, she needed American help. So the wars were going on, and there was drought. That means, we'll read the different percentages. What was 100%, they were down to 32% production of grains. They couldn't feed the people. They were dying left and right. Inflation, because the money, there was no international exchange. It was just as much money as they had to run the whole country on that. So because of the drought, the you could buy just a little bit for so much money, and no one could get more money than what they had because there was no tourism, everything was very isolated at that time in India. Foreign aid. Despite reliance on foreign aid, the World Bank, largely funded by the U.S., fell short of promised aid inflows. And that was because the Western countries did not want India to become a beggar country. They wanted India to develop themselves internally. They wanted India to have not an industrial revolution, but a green revolution, to start agricultural development within their country so that they could support themselves. So they were holding back money, saying, no, first you have to develop your own country, and then we will help you with the development. In the mid-60s was a period of severe economic and political stress in India. The monsoon had failed in 65 and 66. Food grains production declined from 89 million tons in 64, 65 to 72 million tons. The War of 1965 with Pakistan had somewhat forced policymakers to make the tough choice to devalue the rupee in 1966. So devaluing the rupee, it's like what's going on now. When we came to Vrindavan, in order to go to Loy Bazaar, we had to pay 1 rupee. Now, how much does it cost to go to Loy Bazaar? If the Westerners go to Loy Bazaar, they charge us 100 rupees. Maybe you'll get it for less. You can get it for how much? 20 rupees? No. 50 rupees is the minimum. So 50 times the amount of what it was in those days. So this is called inflation. And that with much struggle, the rickshawwalas after our temple opened, before the temple opened, 1 rupee was enough. 1 rupee 25 paisa they started charging us, and we fought like anything. Because you could still buy things for 5 paisa, 10 paisa. 25 rupees was a big jump. One time Prabhupada had to send a check. He was in Bombay. And Saurabh, he went all the way to Bombay to tell Prabhupada we need 3 lakhs to continue the construction. So Prabhupada was going to mail the letter to the bank. And the mailing of the letter was going to cost 75 paisa. And for a registered letter from Bombay to Vrindavan would be 75 paisa. And then Prabhupada asked Saurabh, how much does it cost for you to go by rickshaw to the bank? And he said, 1 rupee 25 paisa. So he said, all right, I'm going to mail it just to save 50 paisa. Prabhupada mailed the check for 3 lakh rupees. Prabhupada was always thinking how to save Krishna's money. So on June 6th, 1966, in one swoop, and Indira Gandhi did this without the Parliament's permission, they devalued the Indian rupee by 57%, from 476 to 750 to $1, triggering bitter criticism in the Parliament and media. So it meant that what you could buy for 5 rupees the day before, on June 5th, on June 6th, you would have to pay 7 rupees 50 paisa. And our workers, they were getting 200 rupees a month to raise their family. 7 rupees 50 paisa, that was a lot of money. The people too joined in claiming that this was the ultimate sellout to America and the World Bank. So Indira Gandhi, she was in a fix. Her country was starving, and the Western countries, particularly America, they wanted India to come up to their standards. So she did whatever they asked them to do, because she had to get their aid, their money. So she did that to the country just to please the Western countries so they would give money in aid. The events of 1976 set the stage for future economic reforms. Reforms became a precondition for increased foreign aid. So it was at that time also that they started 5-year plans. Does everybody remember the 5-year plans? All these big plans that they made. They never quite finished their plans, but they had big plans. And this is all so that they could get the foreign aid. When Indira came to power in 1966 on invitation from the American president, Lyndon B. Johnson, Gandhi visited the U.S. on the 28th of March. This is the exact day that we're on right now. So this is the day Indira Gandhi arrived in America. During her visit, the Indo-U.S. Education Foundation was formulated, but could not materialize due to strong opposition in India, because India wanted to remain isolated. They had been under foreign subjugation for hundreds of years now. First the Moguls came in, they ravaged the whole country, and then they became weak. Then the English came in, and whatever was left of the country, they took to England. All the jewels, all the grains, all the cotton, the salt, everything. They just robbed the whole country. So the present, after the independence, they didn't want any Western influence whatsoever in the country. And here was Indira Gandhi now going for the first time to America just to get that aid. So there was big opposition. And she even went so far, just to please the Western people, they said, your people are starving, you have cows wandering all over the streets, kill the cows and eat them. So it was she who started cow slaughter. She gave permission in the countries of Tamil Nadu and Bengal to begin, and this was all to satisfy the Western countries so that she could get money from them. And big riots and uproar in India as a result of her looking to the West for help instead of within India trying to make things work. However, the visit helped India secure more food and development aid from the U.S. Johnson promised 3 million tons of food and $9 million in aid. Indira resented the U.S. policy of food aid as a tool in forcing India to adopt policies favored by the U.S. So President Johnson, he was saying, yes, we'll give you money, but you have to do what we want you to do. And unfortunately, because the country was starving, she resented it, but to save the country, she agreed to it. After independence, India opted for planned economic development. The key concern was to develop heavy industries. With this, there began rapid industrialization. Well, Prabhupada, you'll hear all the time, Prabhupada says you can't eat nuts and bolts. They were making industries. In those days, we had the NH2, called the Grand Trunk Road in those days. And now you go down the roads, you see universities on every side, all the way to Delhi. You see big industries and factories. None of that was there. It was all complete farmland. And there was one big factory, the Goodyear Tire Factory. It's still there, but now it's a tiny little factory next to all the JCBs and all the other big factories. And the people, there were no cars. Everybody used bicycles in those days. We only had 2 cars in Vrindavan in those days. And they were owned by some of the the pandas. They would use them for taxi service. But no one had cars in those days. So on the main highways, it was all bicycles because there was no development. So they wanted to imitate the West. They wanted to make the first thing, we got to get the tires. You can't have cars without tires. So their first big industry was Goodyear tires. And Goodyear, that was an American company. Then they brought in Coca-Cola. Sridham Prabhu, he was talking about Bengali Market Temple when in the Hindi class. So Bengali Market, we used to serve Prabhupada there. And just a 10-minute walk from there, they had big Coca-Cola factory. So they were allowing all the Western, allowing them to come in, make money off of the Indians. The Indians didn't have, who needed Coca-Cola? You know, you can't live on Coca-Cola. But this is what was happening just to get the money from the West. The economic policies were socially oriented and controlled by the state. Just to build our temple, you couldn't go to the market and buy a bag of cement. Cement and steel were completely controlled by the government. You had to go to Delhi, you had to go to the Ministry of Industries, you had to get a permit from the minister himself just to get bags of cement in order to build our temple. And they weren't interested in building temples. They had enough temples in India. They wanted to build factories, and they wanted to build cinema halls, because Bollywood, they was making a lot of money was being made from Bollywood. Bollywood, what's Bollywood? It's the copy of Hollywood. So that too. So it would be very hard for us to get cement. And Prabhupada himself would go to the ministers to get the cement concession. And then when the cement we'd finally get, you know, it would come in the mail, we would get 1,400 bags of cement finally. So Gunarnava, he would have to go, or Smarahari, whoever was here in the construction team, they would have to go to the cement factory, sit on top of the cement bags on the lorry, because otherwise the truck drivers would sell the cement bags on the way. So they would sit there, sleep on top of the cement bags, make sure the cement came here, and then one by one, and Prabhupada, he would get the slip, because Prabhupada would get the, you know, commission from the, so he knew how many bags were coming. And Gunarnava would have to sit there where our samadhi is now, that was where the cement go-down was. He would have to count every single bag. And then Prabhupada would call Gunarnava in, and he would say, how many bags arrived? 1,436, Prabhupada. Yes, exactly right. So this is how controlled everything was during this time after the independence. Government controlled everything. So India began to follow a mixed economy pattern because it wasn't working. The socialism just wasn't working with the government controlling everything. But in the late 80s and in the beginning of the 1990s, the Indian policymakers realized that state-controlled economy was not able to produce desired results in almost 45 years. Because 1947, that was when you got independence, by the 1990s it just wasn't working. India was just not developing properly. It was decided to pursue economic policy based on liberalization, privatization, and globalization. Liberalization means you want to start your own little shop? Fine, we give you permission. It's your shop, it has your name on it, and if you want to expand it, you can expand it to as many places. No more government control for businesses. And Prabhupada explains why in the next slide. India had witnessed rapid growth in some sectors of economy, even though better results were expected when India began to follow the new economic policy. So I'm adding all of this to help you understand. Here was Prabhupada in America, struggling like anything. His own room was broken into, whatever he had was stolen. Still hoping that he would get help from India. India was struggling more than Prabhupada was struggling. Prabhupada was putting money in the bank. The day before, he had just put $35 in the bank from his book sales, from donations. The students were beginning to understand that when you go and sit in a class, you should bring a gift. They would start to bring grains and fruits and things like that. So Prabhupada was getting more success here than India was experiencing on the other side of the country. So this is what Prabhupada says. In Bengal, there is a proverb. As a proprietor, I can turn sand into gold. But as soon as I'm no longer the proprietor, the gold becomes sand. And he gave an example that in Calcutta, when he was a boy, there was a plague epidemic. Plague means so many people die. And the government started a policy. The plague is spread by rats because the fleas, the little bugs, live on the rats. And when the fleas bite us, then we get the plague. So the government started a policy that anyone who can give one rat will get 5 paisa. It was a lot of money, 5 paisa. So one young boy, very hungry and poor, he found a rat, he got 5 paisa. And with that 5 paisa, he bought some rotten betel nuts. And he cut out the rotten parts, and he chopped up the betel nuts and he sold them. And he made 10 paisa. And then he bought more betel nuts, sold them and sold them and sold them. And he became the biggest betel nut seller, multi-crorepati in Calcutta, with one dead rat. So this was Prabhupada's philosophy, that sand can be turned into gold if you own it. If you have a little shop and you know you're going to get all the profits, then you'll work from day until night, right? So that was the example Prabhupada gave. Now here in this country also, nowadays, this endeavor is being decreased because they're afraid of the income tax. They're thinking, we shall earn so much with hard labor, and the government from the income tax department, they will take 98%. So why shall I work? So this is economic impetus. So they were giving freedom, but as they gave freedom, now we have the GST, we have income tax, everything. So we never had GST before. When we used to print books, we were tax exempt. ISKCON is tax exempt. They never charged us tax for anything. We just had to show our tax exemption. Now, when we print a book, every book, we have to pay the government 18% just to print our own books. They take 18%. You understand? So this is exactly, and it drains you, because you have to write the book, you have to print the book, you have to sell the book, and the government takes the money from you, although the government had nothing to do with it. So this is it's lack of impetus for the hardworking people, because the government will come and take all the money. And that's why so many people in India, they want government jobs. Because in a government job, you don't have to do anything. You just get paid. You sit at your desk, and you get your raises, you get your promotions regularly without even having to work. So they agreed for privatization, but at the same time they took tax, and therefore the people are still suffering. There was one Mr. Marshall, economist. Prabhupada learned about Mr. Marshall when he went to the Scottish Church's school, college. Marshall's economics we read in our economic class. He said that family affection is the impetus for economic development. That is fact. Therefore, according to Vedic system, a boy is married with the girl, and the husband and wife as soon as, this is psychological. So in the big companies, Prabhupada gave the example. Of course, he would speak about Calcutta because that's where he grew up. In order to get a job in a big company, they would ask you in the interview, are you married? They would only hire married people because married people, they have an impetus, they have to work hard to maintain their families. If you're not married, then it doesn't matter, you can live on nothing, So they only hire married people, and many of the companies, they have a limit. You're only allowed to have 2 children. That you can't work in our company if you have more than 2 children, because then you need more money, and they only wanted to keep everything within a box. So everything is still, they wanted to be Western, the Indian mentality wanted to be Western, but they just didn't get it right. Because there aren't such restrictions in the Western countries, although there are many taxes. In 1966, due to rapid inflation caused by accompanying the Sino-Indian War and severe drought, the Indian government was forced to seek monetary aid from the International Monetary Fund and World Bank. So the World Bank, they donate money, they loan money to countries that are suffering, like in Africa and in Asia, such as India, and they expected to be paid back. If the country's suffering, how are they going to pay it back? The liberalization process was prompted by a balance of payment crisis. They couldn't pay it back. That had led to severe recession, dissolution of the Soviet Union, leaving the United States as the sole superpower, as well as the need to fulfill structural adjustment programs. That means United States says to India, you do what we want you to do, then we'll give you money. That's just a fancy way of saying it. Required to receive loans from international financial institutions such as IMF and World Bank. Okay, so now we see why Tirtha Maharaj wrote back, I cannot help you. Why Sumati Maharaji has not even answered the last 2 letters that Prabhupada has written to her. Because India is suffering. And Prabhupada, he's expanding. Prabhupada's doing better and better every day. Tuesday, 29th March. Today I went to see the loft of Mr. Paul. Now this is Krishna pushing Prabhupada, because Prabhupada was up on 72nd Street. The young people don't live on 72nd Street. It's all wealthy people who live there, like Dr. Mishra. He was very wealthy. He had a very nice, big, huge ashram, beautiful apartment, office, yoga studio. And that's because he lived uptown. And uptown is where all the rich people live. So now that Prabhupada's room was broken into, he realized this room is not safe. So Harvey Cohen, who had offered Prabhupada his loft in the Lower East Side in Bowery, he had one young boy staying in his loft, in his apartment, named Paul. So now that Prabhupada realizes, I don't belong here uptown, he decides to go see Harvey Cohen's apartment. It is a big hall with kitchenette and shower, bath, etc. Can be utilized for meeting and Sankirtan purpose very nicely. I think it will be a nice arrangement. I do not know if Lord Chaitanya wants me to change my present place just to facilitate my missionary work. I do not mind my loss for the typewriter and tape recorder if I am given the facility of my missionary work. It is Lord Chaitanya's grace that Robert today brought me an old typewriter, workable, and another gentleman also, Mr. Peter Blaine, 161 West 75th Street, called me on Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. in his apartment, number 3. Income, 1 set book sold, $16.80, check. $16.80, that's a lot of money for Srila Prabhupada. And he's selling nicely. So now Prabhupada realizes it's time to move on. Today, one letter received from Rockefeller's Foundation, that was, Rockefeller's one of the multi-billionaires in America, that they would support educational and industrial development. Prabhupada didn't fit into their plan. Denying any help for starting the International Institution for God Consciousness. The landlord's office visited. They went clear, so Prabhupada decided the day before, it's time to move. So today he's gone to the landlord to say, I want to move. But they went clear 1 month's notice. So today is 30th March. So Prabhupada's giving his notice. That means he still has to stay there for the month of April. because that was the agreement. He still has to pay $70 for the month of April, but on April 30th, he's free. He can move to the loft in the Bowery. They want clear 1 month's notice for vacating the room, so it has to be decided tonight in the meeting. Mr. Peter Blaine handed over to me one German machine, bold type, in very nice condition. That means now he has 2 typewriters. An old one, and now this very nice one. There was no cover, which has to be taken from him. Mrs. Rita Donbroff is unable to help because the man she knew is dead and gone. Praying Lord Chaitanya for guidance whether I shall go to Paul's loft in Bowery. Evening meeting was held and 7 ladies and gentlemen attended. No income today. It is settled that Sussman and Paul will come on Friday, 1st April, to take me to the loft. So Prabhupada has made his decision. He's informed the landlord. And this 1 month of April, he's going to hold his classes. He's going to still live. He'll go back and forth. It costs 15 cents on the bus and the subway to go to the Lower East Side. So he'll have some of his programs there in the Lower East Side, and then he'll have for the people who are still in the Upper East Side, Dr. Mishra students, he'll have classes there. So he's playing two ways now. Classes in both places, and he's also looking to see if it's possible for him to live with this young man, Paul. So sometimes he'll stay with Paul, and sometimes he'll come back to his place on 72nd Street. Thursday, 31st March. 30 days notice served to S.N. Petchers, landlord, by registered letter. No income. Expenditure, registration, 80 cents only. 2 persons came today to meet me. The landlord repaired the window according to his liking. It is not approved by me. The door is still insecure, and that means any time again the door could be broken open. Prabhupada's just waiting to get out of there. There was nothing to steal anyway. So now we're going to begin, because this book, The Beginnings, it goes by month. So we're up to April. And at the beginning of each month, they very, very nicely made a summary of what advancements Prabhupada made in his preaching, his book sales, his classes and kirtans, and his letters and contacts. And then day by day, as Prabhupada writes, we go through that. And then they give a summary of the whole month. So I'm going to read that summary because we don't have anything to read in the Lilamrita until the next day, April 2nd. The Bowery. This is when Prabhupada starts moving to the Bowery. April 1st through June 30th, 1966. The Bowery Summary. Beginning with the first meetings at the Bowery Loft, more people attend the classes. Srila Prabhupada maintains contact with Dr. Mishra and occasionally visits Ananda Ashram on weekends. Harvey Cohen loans Srila Prabhupada his typewriter, and Paul Murray supplies a tape recorder for the classes. Paul, that's the boy who Prabhupada is going to live with, expresses seriousness about becoming a Vaishnava and runs daily errands for Srila Prabhupada. So we'll see in the coming month, Prabhupada would pay Paul $1 a day to run and get stamps, to get envelopes, to get fruits or vegetables, and that would give Prabhupada more time for his typing because he was still translating the Srimad Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada attempts unsuccessfully to get free passage for Paul to go to India on the Scindia shipping line. At the end of April, Srila Prabhupada vacates the room on 72nd Street. Now, Prabhupada had written to ask Sumati Morarji Prabhupada wanted Paul to experience India, to go there, and also to be able to bring back supplies that Prabhupada needed. But they refused passage. Now later, it was around 1972, when the Juhu temple, the land was just acquired, and we had one devotee here, his name was Naranarayan Das. Prabhupada called him Vishvakarma, because he used to build things. He would build the Rath Yatra carts, and in Juhu, he was developing the whole garden. And he was very over-enthusiastic. So in the Juhu property, we had tenants in all of the apartments that were still living there. Although we owned the land, we still had the tenants that we had to pay off to get them out of the apartments. It took about 30 years to do that. So when Naranarayan was building the garden, there was in the center of the whole area was a beautiful Gandhi park. And the people would come on Gandha Jayanti and they would do worship of him, just as everyone would do all over India. And someone defaced Gandhi. Maybe they removed it upset the tenants very, very much. And all of the papayas and the fruits that Naranarayan was planting, sometimes the kids would come and steal the fruits. So one day he takes his big machete, his big knife, and he starts chasing one of the young boys all over the whole property, and everybody sees him chasing, and the devotees fight, this is not going to work. First Gandhi disappears, now he's chasing the residents, with knives. So they beg Sumati Morarji, please put him on a boat and send him back to America. So that was the only free passage after Srila Prabhupada that Sumati Maharaji she agreed to, and because of his overly passionate nature, who knows what he did on the boat, but she told the devotees after that, we will never allow any more free passage on the Jaladuta. So anyway, at least he was able to go back to America safely before they started attacking him. So, next. Friday, April 1st. One Mr. Pop came to see me. He saw the books, took one copy of the first part, and paid $6. In the evening, the meeting was experimentally held at Paul's place, 94 Bowery Place. The attendant was 4 only. Mr. Green paid only $5. Mr. Green was a young man, a carpenter, who was attending Prabhupada's programs. Income, book, and contribution, $11. Expenditure, bus, and subway, 30 cents. So because 72nd Street and the Bowery, let's say, was maybe down on 2nd Avenue, something like that, it was a long way off. So Prabhupada would partially take the bus, and then going down in the subway, you get a transfer. You go into the subway and you sit in the subway and you get down to the Lower East Side that way. Prabhupada still only had to pay 15 cents. I passed the night at Paul's place. It was nice. Okay, so now we have the entry. Some more bad news from India. April 2nd. Mr. Singhania did not reply personally. He had his secretary, Mr. Ishwara Iyer, write to Prabhupada, thoroughly discouraging his last hopes for purchasing a building in New York. This is what the secretary wrote to Prabhupada. I regret to write that Sir Padampatji is not interested in the scheme of building a Radha Krishna temple in New York at present. In regard to the inquiry contained in the last paragraph of your letter, Sir Padampatji duly received your books of Srimad Bhagavatam from your Delhi office. Yours faithfully. A very short letter saying no hope. So that was the very last hope that Prabhupada had. Ban Maharaj, he was willing to send things to Prabhupada so long as Prabhupada paid for everything. Tirtha Maharaj, although he said he would help, by this time, because of the condition in Bengal particularly, he had reneged. He wasn't going to help now. Sumati Maharaji, no reply. And now Padampaji, his last hope, not interested. So Prabhupada, this is what Satsru Maharaj describes about Prabhupada at this time. Seeing him from a distance, a tiny figure walking Manhattan streets and avenues among many other tiny figures, a foreigner whose visa had almost run out, we come upon only the external appearance of Srila Prabhupada. These days of struggle were real enough and very difficult, but his transcendental consciousness was always predominant. He was not living in Manhattan consciousness, but was absorbed in dependence upon Krishna. Just as when on the Jaladuta he had suffered his heart attacks, his reading of Chaitanya Charitamrita has supplied him the nectarine of life. He had already succeeded. Certainly, he wanted to provide Radha and Krishna a temple in New York, but his success was that he was remembering Krishna even in New York City in the winter of 1965 to 66, whether the world recognized him or not. Not a day went by when he did not work on Krishna's book, Srimad Bhagavatam, and not a day went by when he did not offer food to Krishna and speak on Krishna's philosophy of Bhagavad Gita. Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, "For one who sees me everywhere and sees everything in me, I am never lost to him, and he is never lost to me." And Krishna assures his pure devotees that, "My devotee will never be vanquished." There was never any doubt about this for Prabhupada. The only question was whether Americans would take notice of the pure devotee in their midst. At this point, it seemed that no one was going to take him seriously. Because Srila Prabhupada, although 5 people, maximum 8 people, one day when Mr. Captain Pandya came, 12 people came, these were just occasional students. No one had dedicated themselves. No one was fully interested in taking up the path of Krishna consciousness and making Bhagavad Gita their lifestyle. Prabhupada was teaching, the people were coming and going, but he didn't see sincerity. And therefore, although every day he was it was an upward progress for Prabhupada. He was selling his books, he was having kirtan, he was making his cassette tapes that we listen to up until this very day. But the sincerity wasn't there yet. On his side it was there, but on his audience's side yet, he had not found the sincere students that he was looking for. And that will come once Srila Prabhupada gets a place where the next chapter, it's called Free to Preach, because he would no longer be under any constraints once he moves out of this place on 72nd Street. He wouldn't have to pay the rent. He would simply have to, every day, give classes, and the students started coming. In fact, eventually, the students asked Srila Prabhupada, "Can we learn Sanskrit from you?" And Prabhupada had a Sanskrit class along with the Bhagavad Gita class. And he had musical instruments, because down in the Lower East Side there were so many musicians. They would all come, they would bring their musical instruments, they'd have a wonderful kirtan with Prabhupada. So there was bhakti being developed once he moved out of the 72nd Street area. So this is Prabhupada's, we read just here, the disheartening letter from Padampat Singhania. This is what Prabhupada has to say about April 2nd. I came back from Paul's loft to Dr. Mishra's apartment, took meals, came to my apartment, received one letter from Govinda Maharaj. Govinda Maharaj was the assistant to Tirtha Maharaj. Govinda Maharaj, he was more or less the secretary, and previously Prabhupada was writing to Govinda Maharaj, but he wasn't getting any success, so then he stepped over Govinda Maharaj and started writing to Tirtha Maharaj. But then Tirtha Maharaj, he wasn't coming through. So now again communication started with Govinda Maharaj. Went with Yolanda and Cynthia to Ananda Ashram, because this was a Saturday. Passed night and held kirtan. The kirtan was appreciated. So yes, Prabhupada was making success, and this is that interim month where Prabhupada's going to have, actually he needed 3 feet. 1 foot at the loft on the Bowery, 1 foot on 72nd Street, and 1 foot at the Ananda Ashram, where he would go to do the kirtans and cook for the devotees there. For the 3rd of April, from Ananda Ashram, he came back to New York, passed the night at his apartment. Dr. Mishra gave me a tape recorder, which is not working. No expenditure and no income. April 4th. Today I went to see Mr. Bogart. That's Prabhupada's friend who was helping to set him up. So far Prabhupada had one success, and that was the Salvation Army, amongst all the different institutions that Prabhupada was aspiring to get help from. His publisher, Mr. Lawton, is interested in publishing Srimad Bhagavatam, so that's a good news. Mr. Bogart offered me a typewriter and tape recorder, so now Prabhupada's got about 5 tape recorder typewriters. So, loss of one, and then so much has come in reciprocation. I took them. Typewriter's nice. Tape recorder defective. Today I have replied the letter of State Department regarding visit to the President, because this is when Indira Gandhi is in the country. So they had invited Prabhupada, would he like to come and meet Indira Gandhi and the President. There was meeting and kirtan harikatha. No income or expenditure. Expenditure was 30 cents. The 5th April, the whole day I was at Paul's place. He is a nice boy. I prepared paratha. He was pleased to have it. So there, because you can imagine, let's say there's this room, and you double the size of the room, but it's a completely empty room. So what they do was, in these lofts, is in one corner they build a little kitchen, and in another corner they build a bathroom, a toilet, and then in another place they put their beds. And then Prabhupada, he made a curtain so that the living area was behind the curtain, and the other area, the other half of the loft, that would be where Prabhupada held his classes and his kirtans. So Prabhupada now had a huge place with a kitchen, with a bathroom, with a bed, hopefully, and a big place where Prabhupada could hold his classes. It's a great improvement. He's anxious to follow the principles of Vaishnavism. I shall help him to my best. In the evening we held kirtan together. He is hopeful. No income and no expenditure, being a Tuesday. Wednesday, April 6th, Dvitiya. Today I took meals at Dr. Mishra's place. He is not happy that I am gradually shifting to Paul's place. Dr. Mishra actually needed Prabhupada. Prabhupada was keeping him alive with his cooking, and also he was keeping the students happy with the kirtan. They were dancing and singing, because he never did all those things. He would just do gymnastics with them. Today received one letter from Library of Congress, Washington. It is good news. The Library of Congress card number is blank. They wrote to him, but they didn't give him the number for the Srimad Bhagavatam. Prabhupada had a hard time getting that. Paul purchased for me 1 packet of carbon paper, 100 sheets at $2.50. At evening there was meeting. Green was absent. So probably we'll read about, after this month, it's very interesting. We're going to hear the life stories of some of Prabhupada's early students. And it really helps us to understand how Prabhupada was affecting and having such a wonderful effect on these young men and women who he was meeting. Still, there were 7 boys and girls. All attended the meeting carefully. Some of them brought rice, atta, and fruits. There was no collection. 7th April. Today I am staying with Paul. I cooked food and dined with Paul and Sakar. They liked the food stuff very nice. Circumstances seem to be favorable. Paul promises to organize. He is enthusiastic. Let us see. He attended the morning class punctually. So now Prabhupada is also holding classes in the morning there at the loft. Now we have to understand this young man Paul, Prabhupada in his purity and innocence did not understand that Paul was also, while he was expressing sincerity, starting to attend the classes, he promised to organize himself better, he was still taking intoxication, including LSD. So Prabhupada didn't understand these things. He was just seeing people as the positive in them. So Paul, although he was assisting Prabhupada, he still held on to his bad habits, which later we'll find out would force Prabhupada to flee for his life, because Paul, in a state of LSD intoxication one day, came to attack Prabhupada. But this also was a blessing, because this is when Prabhupada finally got 26 2nd Avenue. So more adventures next week. We now have Prabhupada in 3 places at one time, and he's improving in all 3 aspects. Hare Krishna. Jai.